Voice America. Live. This is Point of View. And now, Libertyy McArtor.
Well, it's great to be with you on Point of View today. President Trump's State of the Union address was last night, so we'll play some clips from that and make a few comments in the latter half of the show, so stick around. Also, in the second hour of the show, a great interview. We'll have both the co-director and writer and leading actor of the new movie, I Can Only Imagine Part 2, which was just released over the weekend. They're going to join us on Point of View. It's a great movie, a wonderful story. I just watched it, and I'm excited to share that with you. But for now, let's get practical. A wonderful resource for parents, church leaders, people who work in schools, really anybody. We know that smartphones, social media, screen time, we know those things can be harmful. But how can we set kids free today when our world is just inundated with all of those things? Well, thankfully, I have Clare Morell on the line. She is the author of The Tech Exit, a practical guide to freeing kids and teens from smartphones. I am begging people to buy this book. Clare, it is so good. Thank you for being with us on Point of View today.
Thank you so much for having me on, Liberty. I'm excited to get to talk with you.
Yes, I've wanted to talk with you about this since I read the book last year. Again, it's a wonderful resource. But before we dive into the questions that I have, let me introduce you a little bit. Clare is a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center in the Bioethics, Technology, and Human Flourishing program. Her work focuses on policy solutions to protect kids from digital harms. She's also worked in the White House's counsel office, the Department of Justice in the last Trump administration. She lives in Washington, D.C. with her husband and children. And again, so grateful that she's on. So Clare, let's state the obvious. Your book, The Tech Exit, is not the first book to talk about tech and screen time and boundaries for families. There are actually a lot of books that address that topic, including from a Christian perspective. But I want to know why you felt the need to write this book. What did you feel was missing in the conversation around kids and healthy tech habits?
Yes, and I love answering this question. So I really felt the need to write this book because in my surveying of all the existing resources out there for parents, I found that they all accepted this premise of inevitability, that at some point a child will have to get a smartphone or social media. And so kind of the best parents can do is harm reduction or kind of harm mitigation. Like we can just minimize the damage. But that is just fundamentally the acceptance then of some level of harm to our children. And my research was increasingly showing me that the methods kind of held out to parents by the tech companies and by other kind of cultural resources of screen time limits and parental controls were really falling far short of the problem. And parents were frustrated because they felt like it was an impossible job to keep up with these time limits and parental controls. And they were also ineffective at fully protecting their children. Children were still coming across dangerous content, or they just still saw that even in a short amount of time on the screen, it still had a very strong addictive pull on their child. And so I really wrote this book to help parents and inspire cultural change to actually say a smartphone-free childhood is possible. And it really is necessary. It is the best thing that we can do for our kids. And it's not as impossible as it may seem. And here are other families who have actually already successfully done this. And here are the principles and practical steps that your family can take too on this kind of path to freeing ourselves from these addictive digital technologies, especially during childhood.
Yes, and it is so encouraging. I know many parents have probably stated, I wish we could just get rid of these things, but there are so many excuses or reasons where people feel they can't. And so your book really is encouraging to say, hey, if you want to truly eliminate these from your children's from your kid's childhood, you can. But I want to also address some of the concerns that parents may have about going all the way like that, of really engaging in the tech exit, and just state those at the beginning. And I think we'll address these concerns in detail as our conversation goes on. But a lot of the concerns parents cite is, I want my kids to have friends, and all of their friends have smartphones and social media. So how are they going to connect socially? or I don't want them to be behind if our world is getting more technologically advanced, or I want to be able to track my child's safety, location, because I'm scared about the way the world is. So I need to be able to communicate with them and track them at all times. And so I think this is why parents maybe have leaned toward, or some advisors have leaned toward, the benefits versus mitigating the harms approach, which you are obviously criticizing here. So I wanted to state those as the reasons or concerns that parents may have, but let's talk about some of those harm mitigation tactics and where they are failing, such as screen time limits or parental controls. Why do you think that these things are really disconnected from the gravity of the actual problem?
Yes. So I kind of like to summarize. I think the three main kind of buckets of harms that parents really want to protect their kids from are, one, the addictive design, two, dangerous content, and three, bad actors. And they're kind of told, okay, you can mitigate this addictive design with time limits, and you can protect them from dangerous content and bad actors by putting parental controls and filters and things in place. But unfortunately, the nature of the smartphone and social media apps is such that they are inherently addictive. And even a short amount of time spent on these apps or on the smartphone is overstimulating and addictive to a child's developing brain. And so even 15 minutes a day is, too much, in the sense that they carry the virtual world with them long after they leave it, because of all of the design metrics that are part of these apps, the number of likes, followers, the infinite scroll of their feed. They kind of think about, what are they missing out on when they're not on the app? Like, what are they missing that friends are posting, or if they got new likes? And so it actually dominates their mental space the rest of the day. And increasingly, brain studies are showing us that the brains of users of social media start to structurally resemble those of drug addicts who are addicted to highly addictive drugs, because the structural changes in the brain are actually the same. And so it's showing that these technologies are having a similar effect at a brain level of this kind of addiction. And other studies are just showing that it's actually the use of social media apps is changing kids' brains over time. They become highly sensitized to the kinds of social rewards that they receive through these apps. And so I want parents to kind of recognize it for what it is. I think we've made the analogy as a culture that screens are kind of like sugar. If you have too much, it's harmful, but you can enjoy it in moderation. But really what the brain science research is showing me is that actually, even in small amounts, this is something that's highly addictive. And so we should actually treat it more like other addictive substances, whether that's tobacco or alcohol or drugs, where parents obviously say, okay, that's inherently addictive. We're not going to give it even in a small amount because of the brain chemistry effects that it has.
Wow.
And so that's kind of why the screen time limits really are no match for this addictive design. And I just want parents to feel relieved, because I talk to so many parents that say it feels like a constant battle between me and the screen, and it's not the parents' fault.
Absolutely. And Claire, we got to go to a break, but this is so informative. We're going to talk more about it when we get back right here on Point of View.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Senator John Kennedy argues that census numbers paint a misleading picture of poverty in America. When we discussed this op-ed on my radio program recently, I mentioned that we had a similar discussion with former Senator Phil Gramm nearly 6 years ago. He made the same case in his book, The Myth of American Inequality: How Government Biases Policy Debate. When the Census Bureau does a calculation about family income, they do not consider non-cash benefits that individuals may receive from different levels of government. The bureaucrats argue it's only fair because people cannot spend non-cash benefits on anything they want. But Senator Kennedy reminds us that money is fungible. If you don't have to spend money on health care, you can spend it on something else. How many people live at or below the poverty line? Well, the official figure is 11%. However, if you include non-cash benefits and cash payments from the government, the actual percentage is only 1%. A single mother with 2 kids making part-time income can receive refundable earned income tax credits, child tax credits, and all sorts of other benefits, including welfare payments. Her total income is $64,000. All those benefits are tax-free. Compare that to a middle-class family that earns $64,000 that must pay taxes on that amount. Perhaps you can see the concern. The accounting done by the Census Bureau skews both income inequality and the real percentage of people living in poverty. And these tax-free benefits become a disincentive to get off government dependency. It's time to have an accurate accounting of poverty in America. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back. We're talking with Clare Morell, the author of The Tech Exit, a practical guide to freeing kids and teens from smartphones. Clare, right before the break, you were talking about how the sugar metaphor that a lot of people use with smartphones, that just a little bit is okay, but you don't want too much of it, really falls short because of what we know about how smartphones and social media actually affect kids' brains and how it is actually more akin to an addictive substance. And I think this is so important for parents to understand that research is revealing this to us. So go ahead and finish what you were saying about that.
Yeah, so it's just important to understand the brain science that while, even if it's only 15 minutes, they're on an interactive screen or app, they're getting these constant dopamine hits, every time they hit the next level in a game or they get a new like or they see a new video. It releases this burst of pleasure in the brain through this neurotransmitter dopamine. But what happens is they're getting these constant hits in this 15 minutes. And when they leave then the app or the device, the brain actually doesn't return to a normal baseline. But to achieve homeostasis, it actually plunges the brain into this dopamine deficit state, which creates this strong urge and craving to repeat that behavior. And so the time limit is just truly never enough because it creates this constant craving in the brain. And dopamine doesn't actually produce lasting satisfaction or fulfillment. It just produces craving. And so I want parents to know it's not them. It's not that they're doing something wrong. It is that the screen is literally designed to have this compulsive, addictive effect on their child. And so trying to manage the screen time limits just becomes an exhausting experience for parents because the child always wants more time and it's never enough. And so I think a lot of parents feel like they thought giving in to the screen was going to reduce the number of kind of battles during the day, the child constantly begging for this device. But most parents express that, in fact, it created 40 new battles a day because now it's constantly a fight over the time limit just because of how addictive the design is.
Yeah, that's so important for parents to know. I know we could continue talking about that for a long time specifically, but I wanted to get to the other part, which your book is divided into 4 parts. And part 1 is escaping the trap of harm reduction. So we kind of busted the myth of the screen time limits. But let's say a parent's listening and they're like, well, I've got a teen and it's practical for them to have a phone. They already have one. And in terms of content that they see, we're using parental controls. And I think a lot of parents trust these or think that they're protecting kids. But your book really exposes how these fail. And again, it's not for lack of trying on the part of the parents. So can you open our eyes to how parental controls also fall short?
Yes, and so parental controls are really a myth because they don't give parents real control over a child's device or experience on these apps. And so what I try to explain is that it's actually really impossible for a parent to effectively lock down a smartphone. I often hear parents say, well, we're giving the smartphone, but they're not going to have social media on it. The reality is, in this app-based ecosystem of the smartphone, there are hundreds and thousands of apps available, and every app has its own in-app browser, its own portal to the internet, so to speak. And so even if you were to block social media apps, even through another kind of innocuous app, a child could actually get to the internet and still access Instagram.com and create a social media account and be going online through that. And so what I explain is these controls really have a hard time keeping up with and accessing the content inside of apps. And so when a child can actually get to Pornhub, pornography website, inside of Snapchat in just 5 clicks without ever leaving the app, a parent would be none the wiser. They would just see, oh, okay, my child's spending a lot of time in the Snapchat app. They wouldn't be able to see into what the child is doing, the websites that they're accessing from within that app. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're in Snapchat. They can be accessing other things on the internet. And so I try to explain the social media platforms don't put parents in the driver's seat. Their algorithms are in charge. And the best they kind of let parents do is set up some privacy settings or time limits. But then even worse, if you go to all the effort as a parent to install these external filters or these third-party controls, most of the worst apps like Snapchat, TikTok, Roblox, Discord, they all block those kinds of third-party apps from, again, having access to the content inside the app. And so parents are really flying blind. They can't see into what their child is seeing or doing or the content of the messages or their feeds inside of the app. And so they can still be exposed to really dangerous things, including on the social media feeds themselves. Lots of parents say explicit content, pornography, is fed up to their child on social media. They don't even have to go looking for it.
Yeah, and that's so sad. One of the anecdotes you included in your book that I think is so troubling and kind of shocking, because we wouldn't think this would be happening, is that there actually were examples of people using YouVersion, the Bible app, and the messaging system in there to share explicit images. And so YouVersion made some changes to prevent people from being able to upload photos. But that's how easy it is for people to get around these things. And that leads to another concern, too, which is the exploitation and targeting of children. And this is really dark, but I know you care a lot about this. And again, it's something people need to be aware of, how often kids are targeted by predators on smartphone apps.
Yes. No, this is happening constantly. In fact, Meta themselves found from their own kind of internal research that 100,000 minors a day are exposed to sexual harassment on Meta. So sent explicit images by other users or solicited for things, and that's 100,000 minors a day. And that's just one platform or one app. The rates of sextortion, these kind of crimes that are really catching young boys, are increased just drastically. Snapchat said they received 10,000 reports of sextortion a month, and that's likely only a fraction of the total abuse happening on the platform. And again, that's just one app. And so it's not, this is not an abnormal experience. I think parents think, oh, that would never happen to my kid. And I can tell you, all the parents I've spoken to who have sadly had their child exploited online would say that they had no idea that this could happen, and they would never have thought it was their child, because you know what? The whole time their child was just sitting down the hall in their bedroom. And that is what makes this so nefarious, is that you would think as a parent you could protect your children when they're inside your home from predators, but the online world has made our children very easily accessible to predators from all over the world. And so it's just too easy for them to gain access to our children through these apps. And it can happen within the span of a few minutes to an hour. And so it's just really important for parents to understand, even if they've installed kind of all these controls, like we were saying with that YouVersion Bible app, it doesn't even necessarily have to be through these social media platforms, even kind of educational game apps. If it has any type of messaging feature or social component, predators can still find your children through those things. And so, it's really impossible, again, to effectively lock down a smartphone the way that they are set up.
It's so sad. And one of the things that I really appreciate is you write in your book that the least bad option isn't good enough for our kids. And
that's right.
Also, we wouldn't throw our kids out on a street where we knew that there were sexual predators lurking around. We wouldn't drop them off in a dangerous part of town. But like you said, just in their room, right down the hall, in something that you think is totally safe. And unfortunately, I used to work at a Christian school as a teacher, and the young kids, younger than teenagers, that I would sadly hear stories from them or their parents doing something that they thought was completely innocent on a video game or a smartphone, and the things that they had been exposed to and the issues that those kids were dealing with that they should not have been dealing with at that young of an age. It was really sad, and that was eye-opening for me. So again, we have to do better. We have to do better for our kids. So again, we're talking with Clare Morell. She has written the book, The Tech Exit. If you're watching online, I'm holding it up. It's a nice, pretty blue color. You can find it at pointofview.net. You can follow along with all of the things that we're discussing today at pointofview.net. And I really, really urge you, get a copy of this book. Start a small group with your friends that are also parents, or if you work in a school or you're work in youth group. This is something that you need to be aware of, what is facing kids and parents today and how hard it is to navigate this. And so we have really talked about the problems a lot, and there's so much more information and research in the book, but we have, I think, painted quite a vivid picture of a lot of the problems that families are facing, the battles as they try to figure out screen time limits or parental controls and how those don't work, and the battles that kids are facing, the brain science showing that these devices and these apps really affect the brain more like an addictive substance, more like a drug than anything else. And so we've painted the picture, and the question is, okay, now what? What do we do next? And this is where it's not just doom and gloom, but Clare provides a lot of hope and practical advice for parents on what can you do? Can you swim upstream in a world that is, again, inundated with all of these devices? And yes, you can. We're going to talk about how when we come back from this break.
The Bible tells us not to worry, and yet there is a lot of worrying stuff in our world today. Thankfully, the Bible doesn't stop at telling us not to worry. God gives us a next step. He says we need to pray. But sometimes even knowing what to pray can be difficult, and that is why Point of View has relaunched our Pray for America movement, a series of weekly emails to guide you in prayer for our nation. Each week, you'll receive a brief update about a current issue affecting Americans, along with a written prayer that you can easily share with others. We'll also include a short free resource for you in each email so you can learn more about the issue at hand. Will you commit to pray for America? Go to pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner at the top of the page to subscribe. Again, that's pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in America. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Libertyy McArtor.
Well, again, I think we've painted a pretty vivid picture of the harms of smartphones and social media for kids. And if you missed the first half of the conversation, you can find it at pointofview.net. It'll also be released in podcast form after the broadcast today. But now we're going to talk about where do we go from here? So part 2 of your book, Clare, is called Fast. And I really appreciate this because the reality is we didn't know all this 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 5 years ago even. Like, there is so much more information coming out now all the time, it seems, about how smartphones and screen time really affect kids. So there may be parents who are saying, okay, well, I've blown it. Like, I gave my kid the iPad, I gave him the iPhone. Now what? Can I reverse course? And you say, yes, you can. So you recommend, if you want to kind of start fresh as a family and you want to implement the tech exit, you have to start with a screen detox. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. And I would just encourage parents, it's really never too late to reverse course. I think in parenting, we get new information, we learn new things all the time, and it's never too late to make a pivot and to say, you know what, we didn't know all these harms about the smartphone or about the tablet, and we're going to reverse course. And so because of the brain science reasons I was talking about earlier, there's also a whole science to why digital detoxes work. And it's because, and I recommend in the book, starting with if possible, a full 30-day digital detox, which means no social media, no smartphones, no interactive screens or tablets, no video games for 30 days. And the reason is because doing that kind of full detox actually allows the brain to return to a normal baseline level of dopamine. Because part of the cumulative effects over time of all this interactive screen use is something called desensitization. And it puts the brain in this chronic dopamine deficit state where then real world pleasures actually don't feel pleasurable to a child. It feels boring and mundane to go for a bike ride or to read a book because the screen is so stimulating. And so actually just fasting from these devices allows the brain to return to that kind of normal level, and they actually start to experience pleasure in real world goods again. And then the second piece of it too is it helps a child's nervous system that is overstimulated and then leads to all sorts of kind of dysregulations and emotional struggles, is again able to calm down. The kind of cortisol and adrenaline that are being released by a lot of these things again return to a normal level. So there's a whole science to why these work. And then I'll say anecdotally, the parents will tell you, that first week is kind of hard. It's just like breaking any bad habit. But once they kind of got to 10 days in, they just really noticed a difference in their kids. They stopped asking for the screens. That kind of constant craving slowly faded and reduced. And so I think it's important just to have the kind of commitment of 30 days, get your spouse on board. Maybe they don't fully understand all the reasons that you're wanting to do this, but talk to your spouse and get them on board, and then talk to your kids about what you're doing and why you're going to do this and the good things that you're hoping to get out of this as a family. And then set aside that 30 days on the calendar, make a plan, make plans for the fun things you're going to do as a family instead, like going for walks or going on outings, getting kids playing outside or playing board games with each other. And so it takes intentionality as a parent and it takes commitment. But what I heard over and over from every family that did this is that once they kind of pushed through that initial point of breaking that habit or addiction, it got so much easier. Their kids' creativity came back. Their ability to play independently and entertain themselves came back. And so then once they reached the 30 days, they were like, wow, we can't believe these results we've seen in our kids. We wish we had done this sooner. And then that was what kind of then introduced them into sustaining the tech exit long term. They said, now that we've seen these changes in our kids, we don't want to go back to those screens. And so I would just say anyone can commit to doing something for 30 days. You may be skeptical about this lifestyle over the long term, but I would just encourage you to try it out for yourself and commit to doing this and just see what the difference is like in your own family firsthand.
Yes, and I love that you touched on the plan because, it will be hard when you start something like this, taking away something that your kids have become used to or, let's be real, addicted to. But if you are prepared and have that plan and you laid it out so well and so many steps and practical advice in your book to prepare your family and your spouse and everybody, that is so helpful. And one thing that I will just mention, I happened to see this today. You've probably seen it too. The Institute for Family Studies put out research on how parental rules actually impact the parent-child relationship later on, and rules including screen time and enforcing like mandated outside playtime every day. So kicking your kids outside was actually showed a lot of benefits in terms of long-term behavior and parent-child relationships. So I would just encourage parents, it may seem mean or hard, like when your kid is throwing a fit or something like that at first, but if you just make them do it, then it will benefit them. And I want to clarify too, Claire, when we're talking about the tech exit, you are talking about very specific things that are negative for kids regarding screens. So can you just define what the tech exit would look like if somebody made this a lifestyle for their family?
Yes, and I love talking about this. So, because I do get this question a lot. Oh, is this anti-all TV or all computers? And it's not. I would say it is a very responsible use of those other technologies, but it's a complete prohibition on addictive interactive screens. And so that is mainly smartphones, but also iPads and tablets, anything where the child's actually interacting with the screen, where it's giving them that kind of constant social feedback or notifications that triggers, again, that dopamine response in the brain that makes it so addictive. The same is true of video games, so they are included as well, and then social media apps or any types of, again, applications, even if they're accessing it on a computer or a browser, but that has those built-in design features that are meant to make it interactive and compulsive. And I would really even include YouTube potentially in that list as well. I know some parents can use it educationally if they watch a video with their child, but if you're just letting your child kind of go on YouTube for hours, again, it's really dangerous in the kinds of rabbit holes they can get sucked down. And again, these algorithmically driven apps, they don't want you to leave. They continue to feed you more and more and more content that will keep you hooked and engaged. And so that's what I'm talking about. The tech exit is leaving those kinds of addictive, interactive screens and applications completely behind. And then I talk about this in the book, but then it's a very moderate and responsible use of other screens. And so if it's computers, it's used in a public place and it's always purposeful. The child is using it for research or for some specific purpose, and then they're getting off. It's not endless kind of surfing of the internet online. And then for television, it's not a daily activity in these families. It is something that is a treat, and it's something that is always shared together. So it's kind of sparing and shared is what I like to say. So, a family Friday movie night or watching a sporting event on the weekends, but it's an activity that actually brings the family together, not each person off kind of on their own screen being entertained. And again, they try not to have that be a daily default or habit. They really pursue real world goods and real world relationships together. And then they use those screens sparingly and purposefully. And so that is kind of the definition of the tech exit. No smartphones, no social media, no video games, no tablets, and then a very responsible, purposeful, sparing use of computers and televisions in a family-centered way.
Yeah, I love that. And so I know people will have more questions. Okay, that sounds great. I love how the effects of a detox sound, how that would sound for my child potentially. But if we want to extend this lifestyle, then what does that look like going forward? There are going to be challenges when your kid is older and a little more independent. What if they need to communicate with a coach? What if they are driving and you want them to be able to get in touch with you? What about when they go off to college? Are they going to be hit by an overwhelming sense of needing to catch up on all the screen time they missed in childhood? And so when we come back from the break, I do want to give an opportunity to address some of those, but I'll just kind of preview really quick. Part 3 is an acronym that I love, and it's FEAST, and that's for find other families, explain, educate, and exemplify, adopt alternatives, and set up digital accountability and family screen rules, and then finally trade screens for real life responsibilities and pursuits. So we'll come back for a few final minutes with Claire. I don't know if we'll have a chance to parse every single one of those elements of the acronym, but so much good information and very helpful information too. And we'll also touch on, why does this matter for policy in the United States? I know a lot of people say, well, this is kind of just something that parents should implement if they feel convicted about it, but we need to talk about the broader implications as well. Why do we need to advocate for better laws and policies surrounding these devices for the safety of our kids? So we're going to try to squeeze that in when we come back for a few more minutes with Clare Morell, so stay with us right here on Point of View.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
All right, we're going to wrap up our conversation with Clare Morell, but we still have a lot of information to get in, which you are going to want to hear. And let me just encourage you, if you've missed any part of this, go back and listen to the full thing. You can do that at pointofview.net. You can also find a link to Clare's book, which I highly recommend. If you have any questions about things we've talked about that we don't have time to explain, I promise she addresses it in the book because it's very thorough. So the concerns are all addressed there. You can also find Clare online. She blogs on Substack. So anyways, a lot of resources for after we wrap up. But Clare, just quickly, it's important for us to have support. And so often it can feel like if parents are doing the tech exit, that everybody around them and their kids' friends are not doing it. So what are a couple practical tips for families to find other families who are also living this lifestyle?
Yes, and this is the F that you mentioned in Feast, find other families, is really the most kind of critical factor for being able to, I think, successfully live this lifestyle out over the long term. It is so important for our children to have good friendships. And so we really, as parents, have to be intentional then in finding other families that will share these commitments. And so it doesn't have to be every one of our children's friends or peers that is tech-free, but just even if they have one or two or even three friends in their either school, their sports team, just their community, their neighborhood, that they can relate to in person, that is not all mediated through these devices. It's a tremendous kind of buffer that allows parents to do this over the long term. And I give examples, just starting conversations with the parents that in your church, in your neighborhood, in your school, and just asking them, what they think about smartphones and children, and being honest and sharing the research and things that you're learning. And I think the book can actually be a great tool to use to say, I'm reading this book and I'm learning so much and I'm really inspired by this and I want to do this. And, I'd love if you want to read this with me, we could talk about this together. And so I really actually wrote the book to be a tool for starting those conversations. And so I would just say it doesn't have to be you getting every single person in your orbit on board, but just finding a small group of a couple of other families can create this really kind of powerful counter community that makes it possible to kind of, as you mentioned earlier, swim upstream a little bit.
Yeah.
I will also say, I get lots of pushback, these myths of kids being behind when it comes to technology or binging later in college. And I would just say I found the opposite to be true in the families that I interviewed. And a lot of that was because of the E that you mentioned of they really worked to explain and educate their children on why they were doing this, the harms they were protecting them from. And it didn't necessarily mean their complete and full acceptance of these restrictions at the time, but they could at least understand the rationale and the logic. And then it helps them to form their core habits, ages 0 to 18, without a dependency on a smartphone. And so if and when they did then end up getting one in college, it did not have the same addictive pull. They were actually much better able to regulate if they were on it too much, because they could actually recognize what they had lost by being on the device. So there was always this kind of tether for them of this tech-free childhood to actually help them regulate their technology responsibly as an adult. So it really was the opposite. They did not binge and go crazy. They were much less dependent and addicted to these technologies than their peers who grew up on them. And then also they weren't technologically behind. I think a lot of these tech exit families, would allow children to learn true technology skills, again, through a family home computer. One boy was really into computer science, so he practiced his coding skills on the family computer, and he won a coding scholarship to college, and he never had smartphone or social media because those things really, they don't teach children the tech skills they need. They just teach them how to scroll and be mindlessly entertained. And so there's a way to help our children be prepared for the digital work environment, but it doesn't equal handing them a smartphone or social media. So I just like to kind of explain those things. And then I think a lot of parents, they want to be able to stay in touch with their child, or they worry about being able to get a hold of them. And so in my chapter A on Adopt Alternatives, I really just try to walk parents through all the better phone alternatives to the smartphone that are now available, even some that allow GPS for when a teen starts driving, or to track their location or other things a parent might want, but without an internet browser, social media apps, gaming apps, or anything else that might be addictive. And so there are much better options. So I encourage parents, delay the age of that first cell phone as long as possible. And then when you do opt for a cell phone, pick one of these alternatives instead of a smartphone.
Yes, and I think people forget that there are alternatives, and there are so many more alternatives now. And I really am glad that you addressed some of those other concerns. And it's just, I would remind parents too, with forming habits, we don't say, well, we're going to protect our kid from something we think is really harmful but we're going to expose it to them a little bit so that they don't go crazy when they get older. It's like, no, hopefully you protect them by forming the habit for lifelong. And so that's what you're doing with the screens. But we just have a couple minutes, but I did want you to really encourage parents. What is a way that they can advocate? Because this is a cultural issue. It affects all of society. So what's something that parents can do to help advocate for better policies around this?
Yes. Well, I would say first, start with your school or your school district. I think schools can be a really powerful force for change because they can kind of create and protect a good school environment that can counter some of the negative group dynamics from social media and smartphones. And that's the main reason I talk about the need for policy solutions is you as a parent can do everything to protect your own child. But the sad reality is that this smartphone and social media culture can actually negatively impact even those kids who aren't on the apps by the way it negatively affects the social dynamics. And so schools adopting things like a school smartphone or cell phone ban from bell to bell, so not even during lunch or recess or passing periods, can really protect the school day and the school social environment, not just the academic environment, but also a child's main social environment from the negative influence of these technologies. So I think that's, maybe the most actionable for parents is just start a conversation with your principal or school administrator or talk to your school board about adopting a school cell phone ban. Other private schools have even adopted kind of social media ban policies where they ask students and parents kind of opting into the school to agree that the child won't have social media accounts while at the school. So not just not accessing them during the school day, but actually not being on these apps at all because of, again, the negative impact that using social media after school hours can then have on the next school day in the social environment. And so I think schools can be a really natural place for parents to start, but then also, there are important laws that we can advocate for that help back parents up. And so I would say talk to your state legislators because a couple things at the state level would be passing age verification for pornography websites so that these sites are age gated and age restricted so a child wouldn't be able to accidentally click through to that obscene content. And that's now passed in 25 states, but maybe your state is a state that doesn't have that law. So talking to your state level representatives would be important. Or state social media laws, like the state of Florida passed a ban for social media for under 14-year-olds and then parental consent for 14 and 15-year-olds. And so I talk about these ideas in the book of, parents can ask their state representatives, again, for help and backup by either requiring parental consent for social media, since right now a child can just actually enter a birth date and get an account even without a parent's awareness. So again, making sure parents are really back in the driver's seat on that, or even considering something like a total ban like we've recently seen in the country of Australia, I think can be really helpful to parents in setting more of a collective norm that social media is now just not even a part of childhood. And that makes it easier on every individual parent to live out this lifestyle.
Absolutely. And you can, we're about to go and end the hour, Claire, but this I recommend everybody. She has all of those recommendations and more in her book, The Tech Exit by Clare Morell, a practical guide to freeing kids and teens from smartphones. Get your copy. You will not regret it. Thank you so much for being with us, Claire, and stay with us on Point of View. Another great interview coming up.
Where does moral truth come from? According to 58% of Americans, individuals determine moral truth. A quarter of Generation Z says society determines moral truth, and morality can even change over time. Only 42% of Americans believe that truth comes from God. I don't know about you, but I find these numbers extremely troubling. It really is a crisis of truth, and that crisis has consequences. Look at society. Evil is called good, good called evil. People with biblical beliefs are called bigots, or worse, they're canceled. But there is hope. The Bible promises the truth will set us free, and that's why Point of View is relentless in our commitment to the ultimate source of moral truth, God's Word. At Point of View, we know that God's truth is eternal, and if we stand together, we can help more Americans apply His truth in their daily life. Help Americans find truth again by giving at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Libertyy McArtor.
When life is hard, God is good, and grace endures. That is the theme of the new film, I Can Only Imagine Part 2, which was released in theaters over the weekend. I have had the pleasure of viewing it, and it is good. It is really good, and I think everybody should go and see it, go support it in theaters, and we're going to talk about it, and I'm very excited to have on the line both Brent McCorkle, who is the writer and co-director of the film, also John Michael Finley, who stars as Bart Millard, who is, of course, the lead singer in the band Mercy Me, and, of course, the movies I Can Only Imagine and I Can Only Imagine 2 tell about his true life story. So, Brent, John Michael, thank you so much for being with us on Point of View today.
Thanks so much. It's great to be with you.
Well,
thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I can just, again, the movie is so touching, so powerful, and so I'm excited to talk about all of the aspects, or as many as we can get to in our conversation time. But Brent, let me start with you. Obviously, I Can Only Imagine, the film released in 2018, which tells the life story of Bart Millard, and it led up to the composition of the hit song, I Can Only Imagine. And so I want to know, was there always a plan for a sequel? If not, when did you know that there was more of this story to tell?
Hey, thanks so much. Yeah, actually, there was not a plan. If anything, there was strong opposition to ever doing a sequel. But the original producer, Cindy Bond, who had the idea for the first Imagine movie, after Imagine, had its big success, she came back with this idea. She's like, oh, we could do another movie on the song Even If. And nobody really listened to her. And to my discredit, I didn't really either, and neither did Bart. But she kept kind of bringing it up and asking everybody to seriously consider it. And finally, I'm friends with her, and so is Bart. Bart's dear friends with her. She finally called us both and asked us as a personal favor to just sit down together and have a chat about it. And if we couldn't find anything, she would let it go. And, 7 years later, after asking us to get together for years, Bart and I finally sat down. And it's really funny the way we tell the story, because for about 90% of the meeting, we talked about other stuff. Like, we're friends. We have other stories in other movies we want to do. So we chatted about that stuff. And then at the end of the meeting, we were like, oh, we better talk about this Even If thing so we can tell Cindy we talked about it. But I don't know exactly what happened, but I had the presence of mind in that last little 10 minutes to ask him why he wrote the song. And when he opened up and started talking to me about why he wrote Even If, my jaw dropped, because there was a movie there. And I walked it back to Kingdom Story Company, who was very averse to doing a sequel. And they saw it too. And then we took it to Lionsgate, and I've never had this happen on a pitch, but within 30 seconds of the pitch, they stopped the pitch and said, we love it. We're going to do the movie. And so I really credit it to Cindy Bond's tenacity of just seeing and believing another movie really when nobody else did. And when Bart and I sat down together to finally check that box just for a friend, there was something there. So yeah, there was never a plan to have a sequel to this thing at all.
Wow. Well, I'm glad it worked out. I'm glad that y'all did one, because again, it's great. So John Michael, let me come to you. I know that you've talked about how you actually became really good friends with Bart Millard through the first movie. And so how did you feel when you found out that this was happening and you were going to get to reprise that role?
Well, I was elated. I remember telling Andy, you tell me when, you tell me where. Those were the first emotions that popped into my head. But I think like everyone else, I didn't want to do something fluffy or something easy or something that pulls all the punches. If there's more story to tell, let's do it. If not, then I think we should seriously reconsider. And so, you know, a lot of positive feelings. And I thought, okay, what's this going to look like? And then when they finally sent me the first draft of the script, I was just blown away. I remember, you know, texting Bart like, man, brother, I love you so much. I'm so sorry. You know, Bart and I have become pretty close over the last, you know, 9-something years. And there were quite a few things in the script that I had no idea about. And so I just thought, man, it's another beautiful, true story. Once again, just like the first film, if people find out the real story behind this song, you know, I think they're going to flip. And so it's just been an honor to tell these true stories.
Absolutely. So we've got a couple minutes before the break, and of course we'll dive back in. But Brent, let me come back to you. The first movie tells the story of Bart's difficult relationship with his father, and later there's redemption. And I really appreciate the fact that this movie highlights how even after you make the decision to forgive, healing can be a long and complicated journey. So can you kind of start talking a little bit about how you wanted to handle that kind of tough reality that I think a lot of people will relate to?
I love this question so much because you nailed it on the head. The phrase "a tough reality", that's where we live. We live in a tough reality. And what I've discovered is healing is never linear. We want it to be, especially in the West, but it moves in like undulations and waves and patterns. And, you know, sometimes you think you got over something and you get triggered back to something that happened to you when you were 5 and you realize, whoa, you know, there's still some wounded parts of me here. And so it's such a beautiful question that you raise. I think I have a wacky, crazy spiritual view, and that view is that our heart was actually made to break. And every time it breaks, it breaks open wider and it expands. And when we run from the pain of it, when we run from the grief, we kind of freeze that process. And so what I'm working through spiritually right now is just trusting that God made our heart to expand. And maybe the greatest expansions come through the heartbreak and the grief that, like, you know, drops us to our knees or curls us up in a ball. But that's actually where the expansion is happening, where the growth is happening. I mean, you know, the Bible says that Jesus was deeply associated and understood our griefs and our sorrows. And I don't know, man, that's very beautiful to me. So I'm you know, whenever I work on movies, I'm kind of turning it around on myself. And so, you know, Tim is this beautiful character of, you know, embodying this idea that you can actually, the human heart can actually hold grief and gratitude at the same time. Mm-hmm. But in the West, that's a foreign concept to us. We want the happiness and the joy, and we want the sorrow and the grief to be very far away from us. What if that's not the game here? What if the game is to hold it all in this human experience and really learn to be grateful for the beauty and the joy and just what it is to have a human experience here?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I love about the movie is that it's not easy. It's not trite. It will deal with a lot of issues, again, that people will relate to. And so there's the darkness and the hope. And one of the questions that it opens with that I love is what comes next after you've gotten all your dreams? And again, as we were just talking about, what comes next after the redemption, after the forgiveness, after salvation? You still got to live life, and sometimes it's messy and complicated, and this movie deals with that so well. Again, we're talking with Brent McCorkle and John Michael Finley. We're talking about the film I Can Only Imagine 2, which is out in theaters now. You're going to want to get tickets, and stay on the line with us because we'll have more to discuss when we get back from this short break.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Senator John Kennedy argues that census numbers paint a misleading picture of poverty in America. When we discussed this op-ed on my radio program recently, I mentioned that we had a similar discussion with former Senator Phil Gramm nearly 6 years ago. He made the same case in his book, The Myth of American Inequality, How Government Biases Policy Debate. When the Census Bureau does a calculation about family income, they do not consider non-cash benefits that individuals may receive from different levels of government. The bureaucrats argue it's only fair because people cannot spend non-cash benefits on anything they want. But Senator Kennedy reminds us that money is fungible. If you don't have to spend money on health care, you can spend it on something else. How many people live at or below the poverty line? Well, the official figure is 11%. However, if you include non-cash benefits and cash payments from the government, the actual percentage is only 1%. A single mother with 2 kids making part-time income can receive refundable earned income tax credits, child tax credits, and all sorts of other benefits, including welfare payments. Her total income is $64,000. All those benefits are tax-free. Compare that to a middle-class family that earns $64,000 that must pay taxes on that amount. Perhaps you can see the concern. The accounting done by the Census Bureau skews both income inequality and the real percentage of people living in poverty. And these tax-free benefits become a disincentive to get off government dependency. It's time to have an accurate accounting of poverty in America. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back. We're talking about I Can Only Imagine 2. This is the movie that goes further in the journey of Bart Millard, who, of course, is the lead singer of Mercy Me. I Can Only Imagine, which released in 2018, if you saw that, explored the story behind the song, I Can Only Imagine. And this, a later movie, discusses or explores the journey leading up to the writing of the song, Even If. It's powerful. So, John Michael, let me come back to you. I know you mentioned that when you read the script initially and you realized some of the things that Bart had gone through, that you really were able to, you didn't know that and you felt for him. But when it came to acting out that role, if you don't mind sharing, was there anything in your life that you connected with in terms of exploring the grief and the hardship that you brought to that role or were able to resonate with?
Yeah, I love that you asked that, because I would say I connected to most of it. And it was really therapeutic for me to kind of read that and go through that, experience that, and kind of have older brothers that have gone through that or are going through that. But for me, it's amazing how Bart and I have very, very different upbringings, very different stories, very different life experiences. Yet in this moment, we find ourselves in the same position. And so it was really good for me to kind of work through that. And I'm so grateful that Brent, especially, and Andy kind of entrusted me to kind of work through some of my own life experiences as we're delving into this character and telling the story. And I think it is interwoven, kind of as you mentioned. And man, there are times I'm not sure I could piece it apart. But yeah, it was a special experience for me.
And we talked about a minute ago, Brent, how in the West we do have a hard time holding grief and gratitude at the same time. And I loved that line from the movie as well. But I really wanted to hone in on something specific that I thought was so special about this movie. There are kind of 2 groups that I feel like have a stigma against struggling with any sort of mental health or trauma or seeking healing from that. And that's men more broadly in our culture, and also specifically in the church. It can feel like I shouldn't be struggling with this. I shouldn't show vulnerability. And I think sometimes that prevents people from getting the help that they need. So I wanted to just acknowledge that in this movie, you got a man of faith who is really struggling with some stuff. And I think that portrayal is so important. But the significance of that representation, is that something that y'all were aware of or intentional about as you were telling this?
Man, I just want to stop for a minute and tell you how grateful I am for your questions today. And I don't think it's by coincidence that John Michael and I are on with you together. I would actually love to hear his point of view on this.
I was going to ask you both to respond, by the way. So
yeah.
For sure.
So John Michael and I talked about this extensively. There is a stigmatization in the church towards mental health. And I got a little bit of pushback from some producers, honestly, on this movie. So it's very ingrained and patterned in our society. But, one of John Michael and I's dream for this was to normalize people of faith being able to feel like they could safely reach out for help and get therapy, go to a grief recovery group, talk to a counselor, just admit that they're having a struggle. I've struggled off and on in my life with like a low, kind of moderate depressive hum sometimes. I think it's actually in my genetics. And, I'll let John Michael speak to his journey as well. But yeah, man. And also it's a true part of the story. Bart finally reached a place where he felt like he needed to ask for help. And, I wish he was on. He would tell his story about how therapy really turned his life around. It turned his marriage around. He saw incredible breakthrough and incredible healing when he finally said, I need help. I need to talk to a therapist. And some of the therapeutic breakthroughs he's had with some practitioners, it will send chills. He literally saw just things like completely almost turn around and heal, in a couple sessions. And so yeah, I'm so grateful for this line of questioning, and you're exactly right. I think we're kind of in this place where we're realizing that male, or kind of the male form or the male figurehead, in the Western world, like we need to be stoic, we need to be strong, we need to have this strength, and we don't ever need to ask for help. And that's actually not how we work. We get wounded in community, but we also heal in community. And, being able to open up and share with what's going on in your heart, in your mind, in your soul, there's a loneliness that accompanies this idea that it's not right or it's not safe to ask for help. And John Michael and I talked extensively about this even before we, shot a frame of this movie. So I'm so appreciative of this question. Thank you.
Yeah, John Michael, I'd love to hear your response as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad Brent went first, because I can just say I reiterate all that. But I want to add that it starts at the top. If anything, I had concerns after reading the first script that we were filming an entire movie about a person's mental health, and yet in some ways we weren't talking about it. And I think as soon as I kind of brought it up, it was like, no, this is exactly what we're talking about. And I love that Brent and Andy kind of had the courage to go there. I grew up in the Bible Belt as a Southern Baptist preacher's kid. I know a lot of this stuff is kind of taboo, or we don't really want to talk about it. And so I'm just proud that we got together. And yeah, to answer your question, it was absolutely intentional. It was extremely important for me that we face this head on and we tell a story about mental health. Even if we don't have to say the words, I don't think there's a single line in the film where someone says that Bart is depressed. I think it should be obvious.
Yeah.
And so it was all very intentional. And, you're asking the right people too. Brent's so right. Like Brent and I are like the astrological hippies on set. Everyone else is working in a technical way, and we're kind of like, what does this mean spiritually? What does this mean in our bodies? The times that Brent and I would just sit together, like cross-legged, just sitting beside each other, and no words were said, but we were connecting and really trying to make sure that like we were in the right headspace. And it was a beautiful process.
Yeah, I love that. And it does come through, again, when I saw it, I was like, I know so many people who need to watch this. I needed to watch it. And it's just, I think it's so good to bring that conversation up. One of the things that I wanted to ask Brent, and then we have a couple minutes and then we'll come back and talk some more about the movie itself. But there are actually a lot of resources that accompany the movie for people who want to do a small group or really talk about some of the issues that it raises. So maybe could you talk about those for a couple minutes?
I am sorry, but I'm kind of the artist in residence, and so marketing and ministry teams put that stuff together, and I'm not exactly sure what's out there. But what I will say is, if this movie stirs something in you, and maybe you're concerned to just like call a therapist, and that's okay. But there are beautiful Christian counselors that are trained therapists. Just make sure they're trained. But I want to liberate you. If you hear the call, if you feel a pulse, you're not in this alone. And there are beautiful people that are waiting to receive you and hold space for you and create safe environmental places for you to share your story. And a lot of you guys listening right now, there are things that happen to you that you've never told a soul. And it's just gnawing at you and really causing you a lot of pain and grief. And man, kind of in my journey, spiritually and otherwise, the things that we bring to the light are the things that can actually begin to heal. And so that's what I would say. I'm sure there's some beautiful resources out there, but that the ministry teams and the marketing team put together for you guys. But beyond that, if this calls to you, reach out to a practitioner, to a therapist, to a counselor that will witness you and hear your story. And there is massive, massive healing available to you if you make that step.
Absolutely. I love what you said, Brent. And so I will just say, if you go to icanonlyimagine.com and you click on resources, there is a Bible study, there's a 7-day devotional, book recommendations, and questions and church outreach opportunities. So you can find these resources that the team has put together. And I would encourage people to do that and just listen, to what Brent and John Michael are saying, because this conversation about mental health, about the healing process, is so important for the church, so important for the culture. And I love that this movie highlights that. So when we come back, we'll have a few more minutes to talk about I Can Only Imagine 2. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back after these messages.
Have you ever met a child you knew would do great things? They displayed remarkable imagination, understanding, and a zest for learning. Now imagine someone takes that child and instead of fostering their potential with a real education, they feed them nothing but lies. That scenario isn't so far from reality. From a young age, Americans are fed a consistent stream of distorted facts, from the secular indoctrination they receive in many public schools, to the biases presented as fact in many colleges and universities, to the barrage of misinformation from the mainstream media and the lack of moral grounding in our society. It's not that Americans aren't capable of understanding the truth, it's that they aren't exposed to it enough. You can expose more Americans to the truth when you give to Point of View, where listeners receive facts, perspective, and biblical truth they don't get from society. As long as we have truth, we have hope. Give today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Libertyy McArtor.
All right, we're back for a few more minutes to talk about I Can Only Imagine 2. It's in theaters. Go see it. Talking with Brent McCorkle, who is the writer and co-director, and John Michael Finley, who is the lead actor who portrays Bart Millard. And John Michael, in the first film, you were portraying Bart's story as the son in a very complicated relationship. And another thing I loved about this movie is that there's really a strong father-son theme. I think it's a great film for fathers and sons to go see together. So what was it like to come back to that character, but then to tell the story from the dad's perspective as kind of the generational continuation of that story?
Oh, it was awesome. It was so fun. I've got a little boy that's about to turn 5. So, in between the first movie and the second movie, became a father, became a husband. I lost my mother. My mother didn't get a chance to see the first film before she passed away. And so I certainly was able to bring quite a bit of real life experience into Bart's story. And I think that's what was so amazing, is that it was therapeutic for me. You had to have my big brothers kind of like, hey man, our kids are a little older, but trust me, you're going to be okay. You're going to get through this. And And my kid's incredible, but I think everyone kind of struggles when they first become parents with, just like Bart says, like, what am I doing? I don't have a clue what I'm doing here.
Yeah. And Brent, that's one of the lines that really hit me. And I think it is something that a lot of people will identify with, is an insecurity. At one point in the movie, he says, "I'm the wrong one for my family." And I think that when hardship strikes or we don't know what to do, a lot of people can feel that way, and maybe that they can't help their family or their loved ones with whatever they're going through. So I don't know. I loved the father-son theme. I think highlighting that line, pinpointing that insecurity that so many people feel was so important. But I'd love to give any of your thoughts related to the father-son theme and that in particular.
Yeah, it's so crazy. I was texting with my dad last night. He saw the film and was like, wow, it was, it's an important movie for dads. And if you look at the wounding that occurs on a daily, almost minute by minute basis, so much of this is like truly, I know it's kind of cliche now in the church, but there's so much father wounding that happens, and we perpetuate the wounds that were inflicted upon us by our fathers, and so on and on it goes. And so I think really looking at what it means to be a good dad, to be a present father, to be an attentive father, to be a supportive father, like these are themes and messages we all need to discuss. And we also need to try to look at what it would take to heal this in our culture and on the planet, right? So yeah, I my particular experience, it was very similar to Bart. My dad's father was killed when he was very young in the coal mines, and so my dad grew up in and out of like different stepfather situations that he won't even talk about because it was so painful. And somehow he ended up being like a really good dad for me and a present father, without really having a great role model. So you can break these cycles, and I'm so grateful to have grown up in a home with a dad that was there for me and didn't really perpetuate the wounding that was put on him. I think that's one of my favorite features about this movie is looking at the father-son relationship. And one mantra I kind of use for myself is I have failed as a father, but I'm not a failure as a father. I have 5 children that I love, and I'm going to fail daily. And at every point, whether a dad's going to admit this out loud or not, is we do feel like failures. We feel that very strongly, oftentimes. And, one thing I just want to encourage all the dads out there is, yeah, you may have failed, but if you get back up and you re-engage, you try to make amends, you own your actions, you own your character flaws, and you aren't failing. You're actually tending that fire. You're tending those relationships. So get up again, take responsibility for your actions or your lack thereof, and try again. And don't fail today. It's something we can keep returning to. And it's like a fire that we, choose to keep tending. And so you will fail as a dad. And oftentimes that can lead to like an overall feeling of shame and failure. But what I contend for is if you get up today, again, with a new resolve to be the best version of yourself, to be the best dad you can, then that's not failure. That's trying again.
Yeah, that's so good. So encouraging. John Michael, as you've mentioned, there was a lot in Bart's story. And again, this is all based on a true story. This tells the story of Bart Millard and specifically leading up to the writing of the song Even If by Mercy Me. So, but you know his story. You're good friends with Bart. You related personally to the story. So what's the thing that you want people to take away from his story when they see this movie? What do you want them to really, what do you want to hit them the most about Bart's life and the overall message here?
Yeah, I think what I can say is that if we can all attempt to be a little more raw, a little more vulnerable, a little more open, a little more truthful, and that even means with ourselves. I think there are times that we lie to ourselves, we hide things from ourselves, and I think if we can all be a little more raw, a little more vulnerable, a little more open, I don't want to say the world would be a better place, but, I think it would put us all in a different place to have a little better perspective. And that's what this film has done for me. And, our overarching theme is grief and gratitude, not just holding them at the same time, but balancing them at the same time and letting that tension, hold itself. And so, yeah, I'm hoping people connect with this.
Yeah, absolutely. And Brent, I know sometimes, when you're writing, maybe you have someone in mind in particular. I don't know if that's the case for you, but someone that you are hoping takes something away from this. And I know we've talked about so many aspects, the mental health, the gratitude and the grief. But what's the main takeaway that you hope people come away with when they see this movie?
Yeah. Oh, man. Just to echo everything John Michael just said, I think the greatest suffering that a human being can feel is the feeling of separation. And that's where the loneliness comes from and the homesickness. Like, I've lived with this really strange spiritual homesickness my whole life. And I think it's this feeling of some sort of separation from God. And if you watch my movies, I try to get this line in almost every movie I write, but the line is, "You're never alone." Mm. And there's a lot of people, even people of faith, man, we live with this really strange, uncanny loneliness. And I would submit that none of us are really alone. I love the verse. I kind of paraphrase it, but I think David wrote it in one of the Psalms, but he said, "Where can I go to escape your presence? Where can I go where you aren't? If I go to the highest heavens, you're there. If I go to hell, you're there with me." It's like you can't escape the presence of God, and we're in it now. And so I think the grief and the gratitude, like when you can metabolize or like let that idea in that like God is with you in everything. God is with you in every experience you have, even the hard ones, maybe even more so. Then I think we can really begin to like let that loneliness, that feeling of loneliness, loosen a bit, and even integrate that into our experience. So I have a really weird take on on when Jesus was asleep in the boat, and all the disciples thought they were going to die. I really think he wanted them to take a nap with him. That's what I really think he wanted them to do. And when they woke him up, he was so bummed, because he just learned that, like, he just learned to have peace in every circumstance, even when, this crazy storm was going to swamp the boat. He was asleep.
Yeah.
And so I think Jesus in his ideas and what he was teaching, I think that was the invitation, was to just learn that God is in the storm. God is in the fire. God's with us in everything, in every experience, in every situation. And so I think that's a big thing I would love for people to take away from this movie.
Wow. And it definitely comes through. Again, Brent, John Michael, it has been wonderful talking with both of you on Point of View today. If you want to see I Can Only Imagine 2, I highly recommend it. If this conversation hasn't inspired you to go get tickets, I don't know what will. You can go to pointofview.net. We have all the links there, or icanonlyimagine.com. Find this movie, take friends, take people from your church, and then talk about it afterward, because this is not just a good movie that is entertaining and so well done, but it is so powerful, and it brings up so many issues that as a culture we need to discuss, and as a church we need to discuss. So again, it was great having them on the line, but when we come back, let's talk a little bit about the State of the Union address last night. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Let me tell you what, I have had so much fun today. The first hour talking with Clare Morell, I have been wanting to talk with her for months, ever since her book, The Tech Exit, came out. So I'm really thankful we got her on the show today. And if you missed that or missed part of it, please go back and listen. As I posted on Facebook to my friends right before the show, I said, I'm literally begging parents to buy this book because she gives so many practical tips for what we need to do as parents, what we need to know as anybody who cares about children, cares about families' well-being. And so it was just so great talking with her. And one of the things she said is that, hey, some good screen time, some positive is like watching a family movie occasionally as a treat and experiencing that together, which is appropriate because I Can Only Imagine 2 is definitely a family movie. I actually watched it with my sons when I was screening it before the interview, and they loved it. They love music. There's lots of music in it. And so again, if that conversation with Brent and John Michael from the movie didn't encourage you to go see it, then I don't know what will, but you really should. So it's been so fun, but we do probably need to talk about politics, at least for a few minutes. So for the last few minutes of the show, let's do that. I also watched the State of the Union address last night. I know it's late. It's 2 hours long. So if you didn't get a chance to see it, that's okay. I have an article at pointofview.net posted. It's from the National Review that gives a nice summary. And I am sure there will be more unpacking and analysis happening throughout the week on Point of View. But I thought I'd share just a few clips and a few of the highlights. So it's not surprising that Trump started off touting his successes, including things like closing the southern border, which he has successfully done, mentioning the fact that ever since he has closed the border, there have been 0 illegal border crossings. He talked about the inflation rate going down, and he claimed that the economy is roaring like never before. So there was a clip where he kind of introed some of that. So let's go ahead and play that for people.
When I last spoke in this chamber 12 months ago, I had just inherited a nation in crisis with a stagnant economy, inflation at record levels, a wide open border, horrendous recruitment for military and police, rampant crime at home, and wars and chaos all over the world. But tonight, after just 1 year, I can say with dignity and pride that we have achieved a transformation like no one has ever seen before, and a turnaround for the ages. It is indeed a turnaround for the ages.
A turnaround for the ages. And so one of the things that I wanted to mention, though, and that I'll be interested to see more response to throughout the next few days, are his comments on the economy. I remember when Joe Biden was president, he touted his, economy successes. It kind of fell flat because that wasn't what people were feeling. Now, to credit what Trump is saying, inflation really is down. And I think it was smart of him to mention some specifics, including how much the price of eggs has dropped, how the price of beef is coming down. And so that's smart to highlight because they are still more groceries in general, just kind of general expenses that people have. While they've come down from where they are still more expensive than they were in recent living memory, like 2022. So for a lot of people, they may be hearing, oh, the stock market's doing great, but why is my grocery bill still so high? And so I think that that'll be interesting to see how much is the average person feeling the economy improvements and how will that affect the midterms? Of course, that's the big question. Trump talked about the positive effects of his tariffs, of course, and he claimed that the recent Supreme Court decision, which declared many of them unconstitutional, was unfortunate. Thankfully, he stopped there. I think a lot of people really expected that he might have given the justices even more of a hard time, which would be inappropriate and unfortunate, but he didn't. In fact, overall, he was restrained for Trump. And so he went on to, again, tout his improvements in his administration, in his second term. A lot of people argue that we don't really need the State of the Union address. It's really something that President Reagan started, was inviting the special guests. And some people say we don't need it. It's just showmanship. But since it is tradition, I think there were a few that really did deserve to be there. There were some shout outs that I think were very worthy. And so one of those, of course, was for Charlie Kirk. And I think that's a clip we should play. So let's go ahead and listen to that.
In Charlie's memory, we must all come together to reaffirm that America is one nation under God, and we must totally reject political violence of any kind.
So I was glad to hear that line. And as you can imagine, if you didn't watch, there was a lot of standing on one side of the chamber in applause and sitting down and boos on the other side, which is typical of how State of the Union addresses typically go, very partisan. But that was one of the things, his line about ending political violence, that got pretty much a unanimous standing ovation in the chamber on both sides. I was happy to see that. There were some other special guests that were mentioned, including kind of a fun one, a little bit of a surprise for viewers towards the beginning. And Trump, I'm going to warn you, he says winning a lot leading up to this intro of the special guests. So let's go ahead and play that clip.
Our country is winning again. In fact, we're winning so much that we really don't know what to do about it. People are asking me, please, 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 Mr. President, we're winning too much. We can't take it anymore. We're not used to winning in our country. Until you came along, we're just always losing, but now we're winning too much. And I say, no, 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 you're going to win again. You're going to win big. You're going to win bigger than ever. And to prove that point, here with us tonight is a group of winners who just made the entire nation proud. The men's gold medal Olympic hockey team. Come on in.
So the men's hockey team that just won the gold medal at the Olympics did make a special appearance at the State of the Union address, and they stood up there on the balcony for several minutes, and that was another moment where there was a unanimous standing ovation. Everybody is very excited about the U.S. beating Canada in hockey, of course, and so lots of chants of USA, lots of patriotism displayed. At least people can still unify around sports a little bit. At least they did at the State of the Union address. I'll just leave it at that. But they were also, the lead player anyways, was awarded the Medal of Freedom for that, which is a civilian award. So there were some good moments there. Those are some of the highlights. Many special guests that were highlighted. I think we're good. If it's going to happen, if that's going to be the tradition, then I think it was well done overall. Again, a pretty restrained speech from President Trump. You can talk about whether or not we even need a public State of the Union address. That actually hasn't always been the tradition in the United States. It has since Woodrow Wilson. But for what it was, again, not too surprising, touting his achievements, some boos from one side of the chamber, and a lot of special guests that were highlighted. Let me mention one more thing before we wrap up, and that is the Know Why podcast, which I host, one of the many resources that Point of View makes available to you. And today I have a new episode out, and I wanted to tell you about it because I think it's a great resource for you to listen to with your family, with kids. And it has to do with whether or not all religions point to the same truth. This is a common question. We've even heard some kind of high-profile political candidates and personalities talk about this recently, which I mentioned in the episode, but I interviewed John Noyes, who was an atheist. He looked at the evidence and he converted to Christianity. Now he's an apologist with Stand to Reason, and we have a really great conversation about whether or not you can even know truth, whether or not there is universal objective truth, and whether or not all religions point to that same truth. So you can go to knowwhypodcast.com, find Know Why Podcast on YouTube or anywhere you listen to your podcast, and listen to that episode because I think it's a good resource for you. But that's all the time we have for today. It's been wonderful, as always, being able to sit in for Kirby Anderson and be with you here on Point of View. Again, if you missed any part of the show, the Tech Exit interview with Clare Morell or the conversation we had about I Can Only Imagine 2, go back and listen. Great interviews. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Megan, for producing the show. And thank you for listening to Point of View. Come back here tomorrow.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.